Hi, I'm Brian Jaffe. I'm the author of the book Squeaking By. What I'd like to speak about, a lot of people have asked me, is the book a memoir? Is it a novel? Uh, and I know that there's a category of book that's like a novelized memoir. But I think if I describe a little bit the process of the story and my writing it, it'll give a greater clarity to that issue. Uh, Memoir, I started writing it quite a while ago, and it was a memoir. And to discuss my life, I have Tourette Syndrome, so I wanted to, and it wasn't diagnosed until later in my life, and so I wanted to focus on the stress that causes beyond the Tourette syndrome to where you have a tendency to, if you don't understand you have Tourette syndrome, and the implication both personally and to other people is that you're crazy. So it was very important to me to write about that because I thought there was something unique about that. My case of Tourette syndrome was not uh, a more such a such an extreme case that it was easy to diagnose. Uh, so I started writing it as a memoir and wrote it. I've gone through many versions of it. What was interesting to me is I joined Facebook, learned Twitter and Instagram, and I felt it was time for me to learn social media, which I'd avoided up until then. So what was interesting to me is I suddenly was in contact with people who I hadn't spoken with or hadn't been in touch with for maybe 40, 45 years. Uh, and I would say to them and have some conversations with them, which would be, well, you remember, I have Tourette syndrome, and I didn't know it at the time, and you remember, I'm sure my tics, and I'm sure you wondered about it. And what was interesting at that point is almost no one remembered me in that way. So they remembered me as being full of energy, the way they would describe it. They said, "Oh, we just thought that's because your brain was working so quickly." And what was interesting is how little they perceived of my Tourette syndrome and how radically I felt it was affecting my relationships with other people. So I felt as a memoir, it wasn't to some degree it just wasn't true. It was true in the sense that a memoir is your memories, so it certainly was my memories, but I became very disturbed by the fact that my memories seemed inaccurate to perhaps to an extraordinary degree. But I liked the book, and I liked it, and much of it is true. uh, and the novelization, the reason it's really a novel, is in order, everyone thinks their life is, you know, so essential for everyone to know about. Uh, I don't particularly, but I felt I had to make the story more interesting, and so a lot of it is exaggerated. And even with my friends, encourage them to believe that none of the really negative aspects of my life are true. Uh, I don't know. I'm self-conscious. I'm more comfortable uh, presenting it that way to my friends. Well, to everybody, my life. Anyway, uh, so it went through that process. So I consider it really more of a novel today than a memoir, and I credit uncomfortably. I credit Facebook, which is something that I had never planned to participate in social media, and resisted it for so long. Uh, I think that I owe some of that to Facebook, and I went through a fairly extensive process of rewriting the book so that it would become more of a novel and less of an inaccurate memoir. Uh, I think that's what makes my book different. I think whether every event happened or which ones happened specifically and which ones didn't, and which was exaggerated and which were not, it doesn't matter, because up until a year or a year and a half ago, that was what formed my perception of my life. So in that sense, it certainly is a memoir, but it's really gone through a process of becoming a novel, and I'm proud of it. I don't. I hope other people enjoy it, and I do think it will guide people and Touretters to share what were my feelings and what are my feelings that still shape me about Tourette syndrome and about having it, and how it influences, or how you feel and perceive its influence on your life. I started the book quite a few years ago, many years ago, partly as a therapy for myself to express things that really upset me. Uh, Everyone feels their family was dysfunctional, or many people feel their families were dysfunctional in some way. So I didn't write it to be a book about dysfunctional families, but I started it many years ago and really approached it where they were little stories, and they were things I wanted to get off my chest and express with a greater clarity, require me to think more deeply about each thing rather than for these things to be passing thoughts. And the book really developed from there. I I feel that the book will be helpful to people with Tourette's and people without Tourette syndrome. And the reason is, people with Tourette's, again, they have a perception, as I did. I'm sure they have a perception of their life that is, to some degree, different. We all do. That is different from the way others perceive you. And it's important to understand that, and I think my book would help Touretters to understand that. And the other aspect of it is, people without Tourette syndrome will have a greater understanding of what it's like for the people who are Touretters. Again, my case was not as extreme as many people's, so how it influenced me is to a slightly lesser degree, because I didn't have some of the most dramatic symptoms. But by the same token, many people with Tourette syndrome do not have the most dramatic symptoms. People simply expect people with Tourette syndrome to be running around and cursing and saying foul words and absolutely just flinging their hands everywhere, and just looking like, I don't know, that they're insane. Just such bizarre behavior. And there are cases like that. Cases like that are so sad because they're so antisocial. They're so limiting in terms of what you can do. Because the bottom line is, when you have Tourette syndrome, even when you're diagnosed, who cares? Because your manifestation, your tics, your vocalizations, they still exist. I mean, you can't wear a sandwich board that says, oh, I have Tourette Syndrome, and even if you do, there's still so many people who go, what is Tourette Syndrome? And so you have to live with it, even after a diagnosis, and it causes such a tremendous amount of stress within your family. You know, you can, it really can be dreadful. I don't consider myself an expert in terms of knowledge about Tourette syndrome. I understand it much more because I have it, and so I've read much about it. Uh, each case and each person's feelings are unique to them, and they have to process them, and they have to process them within their family and their family's dynamics. So there are aspects of it that are shared, and in terms of it being antisocial, and there are aspects of it that are quite unique to each individual, and to understand that and to help and to resolve those issues is a really big deal, and really that's, I see it as the primary challenge for people who are diagnosed, is how that gets processed and how that's reflected in their lives. Because, again, believe me, I was diagnosed, I was very excited with the diagnosis, and then on the way home, I got in the elevator with people and squeaked and squealed and blinked and wiggled my nose and made grimaces. And believe me, even though I turned around and had the thrill of saying to them, oh, I'm, sorry I'm doing that, I have Tourette syndrome, I don't think they particularly cared. If it was disturbing to them, it was disturbing to them. It's like a baby screaming on an airplane. Babies scream, babies cry. But ultimately, you're sitting next to them, and even though you know that, you may want to throw them out of the airplane. That's the way you'll feel. And so ultimately, those are, it's tough. It's tough. It has a unique quality, and it's very difficult to live with, both personally and in relationship to your family. My book is now available through Amazon and through, I don't know, virtually all the ebook sites. I don't even completely understand yet the marketing of a book, but it's available to everyone, and I think it will increase an understanding. It's not just my story. It will increase an understanding of Tourette syndrome, what it's like on a personal level for people with Tourette syndrome, people who suffer with it, and for people who don't have it, who are trying to deal with it in their lives because someone who is close to them has it, and they have to make some adjustment as well. The bottom line, I wrote the book. A lot of it is not true. If it were precisely my life, I would be far more distressed and feel that I had been far more evil than in fact I am. And today, I'm comfortable with myself. I'm comfortable with being a Touretteer, and I've learned to adapt, and I hope that someday all Touretters will. Thank you for watching.